Down. Good boy. Very good. Stay. Okay. In case I haven't met you yet, I'm Rosina, and my dog is Zakir. He's my service dog. So I encourage you to take a look at the code so that so grab that URL really quick, because we will be looking at some code, and this way you can look at it in context, because I'll mostly be just doing little snippets. So, okay. All right. It's also on my GitHub account, so that's just going to take you to my GitHub account, so you can find it from there. Okay, so we're going to talk about Angular. So what is AngularJS? The AngularJS website describes it as a super heroic JavaScript framework, and it really is, to be honest. Mishko, the founder of the project, describes it as what the web would have been like if it were built for web apps, not just for websites. And today we almost never build static websites. Nearly all websites are dynamic at some level. And most of us build web applications. That's why we're here. Once upon a time, not that long ago really, one would never have imagined moving a desktop application to the web. In fact, I remember back in the very early days of the web, it was scoffed at that you would possibly want to do much interaction. At most, you might want to search the documents on the server. But the web was just a document store, and that was it. So, yeah. Okay, in web time, that was a very long time ago. But that was only back in the 90s. So things have changed a lot. Today, nearly all applications have some kind of web interaction. And there are web app replacements for almost every application that you find. And all of us are obviously building web applications. That's why we're here at this conference. So web apps can be round-trip applications, and that's where most PHP frameworks come in. Or they can be single or almost single page apps, and that's where JavaScript frameworks come in. Whether your framework is homegrown, built on jQuery, or a framework like Angular or Ember or Backbone. And the world is moving more and more towards single-page applications because of their responsiveness to the user. Users just like to use them more. But even if you don't go with a full single page, you usually will have some JavaScript to handle user interactions. So why AngularJS? Well, Angular lets you use HTML as your template language, which is really good. Actually, most of the frameworks do have have HTML as their template language. And we all know and love HTML, right? Okay. But it really is a very good markup language for documents, for relatively simple documents. And it's a little verbose, but that makes it easy to read. If you've ever used LaTeX, you know what I mean. It's not easy to read. And the problem with HTML is it can get very verbose and repetitive. Let's say you want to do something like this, a nice little page heading. You might end up with some code that looks like that. Yeah, 3 divs and an H1, just to make a simple heading that looks semi-decent. It's not styled that great, but, you know. What if you could write instead something like that? One line to do all of that. And in AngularJS, you can do that. Your UI code can be declarative like that. This is called a directive in Angular, and it's an implementation of web components. If you went to Google I/O or watched any of Google I/O this year, you would have heard a lot about web components. So Angular lets you extend HTML components, HTML syntax to express your application's components clearly and succinctly. In other words, it lets you simplify your code. The less you have to write and test, the better, right? I certainly don't want to write that. We've been talking several talks today about about writing less. and testing as much as you can. So AngularJS does a lot of the hard work for you. That's pretty much the definition of a framework. That's why we have them. It provides templating, routing, and synchronizes the model and the user interface. In other words, it does data binding, and also does a host of other things. So, talking about data binding. Data binding is a combination of a template and the model in order to create a view of the data for your user. With one-way data binding, you take the template, you take the model, you mash it together, and you produce a view. And then it stays that way. The view doesn't change. At least not until the next time you take the template and the model and you mash them together. We do it all the time. That's what we're doing when we're generating our views from our PHP and send them to the browser. So, and with PHP, it's really your only choice for view generation. Many JavaScript frameworks also follow this model, although more of them are moving to two-way data binding, which is what Angular uses. And the model is a single source of truth for the application state. So that greatly simplifies the programming model for the developer. You can think of it simply, the view is simply an instant projection of your model. What your model is right this very moment is what you see in the view. And when you change the model, it instantly is reflected in the view. So when the user manipulates the view, and if you change something in the model, it's instantly reflected in the view. When the user manipulates the view and changes it, it's instantly reflected in the model. That makes your life a lot easier. So if you've worked with other JavaScript frameworks, you may know that you have to inherit from some class and provide all kinds of getters and setters to make this magic work. Angular lets you use regular, plain old JavaScript objects. Whatever you want to use, that's fine. You define how your model looks. So the benefits, we've probably mentioned some of them. Well, we have mentioned some of them. For our users, we want to create a rich, intuitive user experience, something that they can automatically pick up and use without you having to teach them how to do it. They just automatically know because it's very easy and intuitive. For developers, we want to have a separation of concerns. So we only have to deal with one thing at a time. We want UI code that is declarative. It tells us what to show, not how to do things. We want application code that is imperative, so that it does how to do things, not what is showing at the moment. Most importantly, it needs to be testable. AngularJS has a strong testing background, so testing is really easy. We won't talk about testing today because we don't have time, but when you start learning Angular, check out testing. Make sure you start there. Okay, enough of talking. Let's build something. We have a client who owns a ranch. They want us to build an application to keep track of all their animals. So we'll use my ranch as an example because I have pictures of them. So I have 2 horses, a dog, and a whole bunch of chickens. Okay, that's not even all the chickens, but you got to have a lot of chickens. So let's write an app to keep track of all these animals. And here's our requirements. They want us to provide and edit a name for the ranch so that they can name their ranch whatever they want. They want to show all the animals that are on the ranch, which should be loaded from the server because they're going to change from time to time. And they want us to show the correct gender name for the type of the animal based on the species, gender, and age. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. We'll talk about it. And then they also want to be able to search the animals on the ranch and only show the ones that is in the search string. Okay, so first let's mock up what this might look like in static HTML. We might end up with something like this. So it's pretty tiny, but, and I've cut out a lot of the animals. I just have the first one. But there you go. there's some static HTML that will show all the animals on the ranch. It won't let you edit. It won't let you, search the animals, but we can at least see all the animals. So now we could create a round-trip application for it. We could stick a form on there for the search box and submit it to the server to each time we want to search the animals and get back a page just like this with the animals on it. We could allow editing of the ranch name and send that to the server and get back a page with a different ranch name. But that wouldn't be very enjoyable for the user. And I know that for me, one reason I hated web apps for so long, despite being involved since the very beginning, was all the waiting every time you made a round trip to the server. It takes a long time to be able to accomplish a task that's so easy on the desktop. So let's build a web app that isn't round trip and doesn't do that. Let's build one with Angular. So we have to do a little bit of setup to start our application. We need to include Angular and bootstrap the application. It's pretty easy. There's how you include the Angular, just like any other JavaScript. I've used the Google API Content Delivery Network for it. You can also download it to your server, but this is definitely the recommended way. And the current stable version is 21 at the moment. And the current development version is 1.3.0. We're going to use 1.3.0, but there's nothing that you can't do today with 1.2. And I've actually been using 1.3 for several months, even though it is still in beta. The Angular team is very, very good about letting you know about breaking changes. But if you use it in production, you got to know there might be breaking changes. So next we have to tell the browser that we're going to use an Angular application. We do that by adding an attribute to a tag, to some tag in on your page. Typically it's done near the beginning of the page on the HTML or the body tag. However, it can be on any tag that makes sense, that encloses your application. It could be on a div tag or a table tag or whatever makes sense for your application. Most of the time it will be on the HTML or the body. So I forgot to show you okay. So this is before we Angularized, because I forgot to show you. And unfortunately, my CSS turned out to not work at this size very well. So I'll have to change that before I give this talk again. See here, but we can see that there we have a list of all the animals with their descriptions, just like our client wants, okay? And then here it is Angularized. We now have the Angular JavaScript, and it hasn't changed anything. That's good because we haven't told it to change anything. It's just bootstrapped, okay? So let's go back. All right. So if you remember right, the first thing that they wanted was to be able to provide and edit a ranch name. So let's do that. Here's our ranch name code. We have that H1 in there. And that's the important part, so we'll just change it a bit. And here we have the syntax, or have the changeable ranch name. So we have a couple things here. Here's where we have the ranch name, which was my page heading in there. And we've enclosed a scope variable called ranch name inside of the curly braces. And that says, whatever this expression evaluates to, put it there. So ranch name is a scope variable that we're going to use. And we're going to have first an ng init. Actually, I can point them out this way better. An ng init, which says, when you get to this point, do this. So in this case, we have assigned my ranch to ranch name. So the page is always going to start out with my ranch being ranch name. Okay. Then we've added an input field, which is no big deal. We have lots of input fields, but we've added ng model equals ranch name. And that says whenever you see whatever is currently in ranch name, put that in the input. That's going to be the initial value. And whatever the user types into the input box is going to be stored in ranch name. So let's see what that does. Let's go to step 3. And now we have an input box which starts out with my ranch, and we can change it to Rosina's ranch. Okay? And it immediately shows up at the top of the page as now it's Rosina's ranch. And we can make it Joseph's ranch. There we go. Got Joseph's ranch. Okay. So whatever you put there is immediately going to be changed in wherever that ranch name is being shown. Okay. So, all right. Now, if we look at our HTML, we have lots of messy code and extra stuff that tells us how to display information, not just what we're showing. We have the header area, which even now is even more complicated than it was before. And we have many copies of this code that shows the individual animals. So there's actually 17 of them on the page, just like that, with different name, different species, different gender, etc. So let's see what we can do to clean this up. The simplest way to do templating is just to use a partial. This is useful when you have static pieces that you want to include multiple times. So let's use ng include for the header. First, we'll create a file to put the header code in, and we'll just put it in the partials directory. Now you can replace the header in index.html with an ng include. Just one line. It says ng include source is partials. ng include is another Angular directive that tells us that tells it whatever's in this template, put it here. Okay. This works for us for the moment. It's not the best way to do it, but it certainly works for this situation. Now we're faced with the animals, which is repeated 17 times with a different animal name, species, gender, age. So we could use 17 ng includes, one for each animal. That wouldn't be very effective, though. There's a better way. Wouldn't you like to write something like that? So we can say animal, and here's the information about the animal. And we'll pass it give it a JavaScript object that says the name is Gypsy, the image is that, the species is horse, the gender is female, and the age is 17 years. So I know I would. It's declarative. It's easy to tell what is being put on the page, but we don't have to worry about all the implementation details. And if we change how it's implemented, we don't have to change 17 versions of it, or unknown numbers of version of it when we get stuff from the server. So now we do have to write some JavaScript. So far, notice that we have not written a bit of JavaScript despite being able to edit the branch name. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to name our application. We'll change the HTML tag, the ng app, to have a value. So we're going to call it ranch. Let's see. When the ng app directive is processed, Angular will know to look for a module, an Angular module called ranch, and inject it there. So we'll create a new file called app.js. And it's pretty simple. Let's start at the end of it. We create the Angular module called ranch, and then we're going to let's see here. And then we're going to inject the ranch.animal module. So Angular uses dependency injection heavily, so it's a good idea to understand what it is. And it's been mentioned a little bit earlier today, but it is a software design pattern that deals with how components get a hold of their dependencies. So the Angular injector subsystem is in charge of creating components, resolving their dependencies, and providing them to other components as requested. Now we could do everything in one module, but it's good practice to set up your application from the beginning to be extensible. So we're going to break it into the ranch module and the ranch.animal module, where the animal module will handle all the things that deal with animals. So moving up the line, the line above creates the module animal.module with no dependencies. So now let's define the ranch.animal module. Let's see here. We'll create animal/animal directive.js in naming. This is general naming conventions, but not exactly how you have to do it. And this attaches let's see. We'll attach to it a directive called animal, which has, and the directive is then described by this object that the directive function returns. Restrict says this can either be E, which is an element, or it can be used as an attribute. That allows us to write it like that, animal with everything, or we can put the animal on a div or span or whatever we want to call it. Replace says whatever element that the directive is on, replace it with what's in the template. And then we have a template. You can also just put the template straight in the code, but it's generally a better idea to give it a template URL. And then we define the scope for this particular one. And in this case, we're saying we have one attribute on the scope, or one scope variable called animal, and we're going to get animal from the info attribute. So now we can write this: animal info equals, and the object that describes the animal. Okay, that's great, but we haven't defined the animal template. So now there we go. So there's our template, and you can see that it looks pretty much like one of the individual animals, right? Haven't really changed anything there, except for I've replaced the individual animal names with references to the animal object. So we have animal.name, animal species, animal gender, animal age. And you can see that the animal notes, because some of the animals had notes, you may not have seen that since it wasn't on the screen, unfortunately, because of my CSS. But some of the animals have notes, but we only want to show that if there actually are notes for there. So we've put it in an ng-show. An ng-show says if this expression evaluates to truthy, then show this. Otherwise, don't. Makes sense. So if animal.notes has a value, and then it will show it. If it doesn't, it won't. If it's an empty string, that's also the same thing as falsy, so it won't show it. So there's one other difference. Can anybody spot it? I'll give you a hint. Take a look at the image tag. ng-source, right, exactly. Who was that? Oh, sorry. Pass it back. All right. chocolate for the guy who had the answer. Sorry. I'll have to be more careful next time. All right. Okay. So, all right. So there we go, an ng source. So an image tag has a source that tells the DOM when a DOM is processed, it says go out and get that image, correct? But it only does it once. When it first sees it, it processes it, it gets the image, and then it doesn't get it again. But this image could change later on. So we have a directive called ngSource, which can only be used on an image tag, and it says whenever it changes, tell the DOM to reread this and recreate it. So just one of those little things to know. Okay, so now we have to tell Angular to use our animal directive so that it loads it. And we changed the ng app to be the ranch app, and then we included the script that we've added. Okay. So that's great. Oh, sorry. And now, if we look at it, see here. Again, we're not going to see any change because although you may have noticed there was a little tiny lag in the loading. Okay, that very, very, very minor, but that's because it takes a microsecond for it to process all those and generate all those now. So, and now we have this great app. We can this great prototype, we can take it to our user, and they can tell us how it doesn't look anything like they wanted, and we can go back and change it to their heart's content very easily by editing that directive, by editing the ng include partial. Okay? Oops. Okay. So far, so good, but it really doesn't do much. So let's make it do something. The animals aren't going to be static. They're probably going to change from time to time. As the animals come and go, some get eaten, the chickens anyway. Hopefully the horses and the dogs won't get eaten. So we need to be able to read the list of animals, probably from some database on the server. So typically Angular apps will get data from some kind of RESTful service that usually sends data in JSON format. Doesn't have to be. Other data sources are usable, but that's the most typical. So we talked on the second day of the workshop about creating an API with Cake, so you can certainly use that as the back end to get your data from the server. Then we also want to be able to search the animals that we know about and only show the ones that match the search string. Finally, the user wants to show the correct gender names. So let's get going. Data, especially when it comes from outside your application, should always come from a service. Services know how to fetch data, modify it, save it if appropriate. In fact, anything that interacts with data should be in a service and completely encapsulate it. So we're going to write a very simple service to fetch our animal data. Then we'll loop through it and display each animal. So to create the service, we tell our module about it with .service. Give it a name and tell it what to inject and write the function. Let's see here. Give it a name, there we go. Tell it what to inject, which is $resource, and define a function that will return it. So we're going to use the $resource function or service, which is provided in Angular. In the ng resource module, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then the call to $resource is then going to return a function with a query what's it called? Query method that will get our data from the server. So $resource happens to be in the ng resource module, so we will inject that into our ranch.animal module, just like that. Okay? So next we have to tell our app about our data. So we need a controller. Controller wires things up and provides controls to the view. So here we tell Angular, here's a controller called animal control. Please inject the service animal and the $scope, which is the current scope when the controller is executed in the DOM. So then we define a function for our controller. And in this case, all we need to do is get the animals from the server. So we're going to say animal.query, because that's what the animal service returns, is an animal. And then that will go out to the server, get our data, and bring it back to us. So now we need to inject our controller into the view in the right place. If you remember in our index.html, we had a div that surrounds all the animals. We only need the animal controller on something that controls the animals, so let's put it on that div. So there it is. We added ng controller directive that tells it which controller to use, and we called that animal control, so it knows how to get it. Okay. That's great, but so far it won't look anything different. There's nothing here that puts anything in the view. Our animals are just sitting out there unused. So let's go back to index.html. And remember how we told it to show the animals? And we had to repeat it for each animal that we had. So now we need to make that dynamic so that it can use the animals that we have fetched from the server. So let's change this to show the animals from our scope and show however many there are. And it only takes one element to do that. This had to be repeated 17 times, or one for each animal. Now we don't even know how many animals we have, so we need to repeat it. We need to loop around and repeat it. So that's a lot shorter than the other one. So ng-repeat is another directive that says whatever this element is that I'm on, repeat it for every object in this array. So we get an object, the array is animals, and we want to set the animal scope variable for each animal in the array, and then that scope variable will be true for that particular element. So now we've also then passed that scope variable animal into the info on the animal directive so that we can repeat it. Now we have, so now we'll have a new scope for this directive, for this directive, and we'll repeat it animal times. In this case, it'll be 17 because we still have the same set of animals. So let's take a look at that really quick. So now you can see there's our animals, only this time now it's being loaded from the server and then being shown on the page. We don't really see it happening because it happens so fast. But those are actually loaded, and if you look in the code, you can see how it's done. Okay. So the next thing on our list is searching. How hard do you think that'll be? Anybody? Very good. Yeah. It's very, very easy. It's actually, you want a chocolate? Should I throw it at you? I'll come deliver it this time. Who was it? Oh, all the way at the back. Ready? All right. Yeah. Searching isn't going to be really trivial. So we're going to add an input element with an ng model called animal query. It's kind of a, and then we can, then the magic here happens with the filter on the ng repeat. We change our ng repeat to say pipe each of the animals into a filter, and that filter is called filter, which the name of this wasn't that great because it's no different, but it's a filter called filter, and that filter takes whatever it's passed in plus whatever parameters it has, which in this case is animal query. And it says if animal query, if this string is in this object, then I'll show it. Otherwise, we won't. Okay? So let's take a look at the browser and see how it works. And, oops, I skipped one. There we go. Okay. So now we can type Bella, and we show only Bella. Okay. And we can type Zakir, and we show only Zakir. And notice that it happens immediately. There's everything. Let's say we want to show all the female animals. So there's female, female. I guess I have no chickens marked as female. I thought I did.
Search for male.
You search for male, actually, and you will get all of them. Because why? Because male is in female. Male happens to be in female. So sometimes if you want that kind of searching, you have to do things a little bit differently than this. There is a way to do it. It's not too hard. Here you go. Have a chocolate. Thanks for the question. All right. Let's go back. Okay. So let's move on. Our next thing was to show the gender names. Filters are actually really incredibly powerful. So let's use it to do something else. And I'm going to try and go through this really fast because we're short on time. So who knows what a horse is called if it's a female and older than 3 years? A mare, very good. Who was that? You get another one. How about a male? You don't know what a male is? How about if it's an altered male? Here you go. No? Oh, come on. Okay, so what? Stallion. Very good. Very good. Okay. So, horses. A mare is greater than 3 years old and female. A younger than 3 years old is filly. Stallion is a male older than 3 years. A colt is less than 3 years. And a male that's gelded, that's altered, is a gelding, no matter how old it is. Dogs. There you go. Female is called a bitch, and I mean that in the dog term, not the swearing term. Okay, male is a stud. Altered, they don't care about ages in dogs. They're the same. So altered is spayed female and neutered male. Chickens actually have names too. Chickens older than a year is a hen. Less than a year is a pullet. Older males are roosters or cockerels. And in other countries they're called other things, but we're going to go with the American ones because that's where I'm from. And an altered male is actually called a capone, that's actually very rare these days, but it used to be quite common. It's considered quite a delicacy, actually. So now, I know you guys thought that you were here to learn about Angular. Really, you were here to learn this. Just kidding. Let's get back to Angular. Okay. So let's see how we can use a filter. In the end, what we're going to do with it. We take the object animal, and just like we did with our array of animals, we piped it, or we filtered it, by sending it to a filter, which is called gender name. Okay, so let's write this gender name filter. And here we go. It's pretty simple. I've actually cut out a bunch of code that actually does the figuring out what the gender names are. But it shows the important parts for our purposes. So we're going to create a filter in our ranch.animal module, and we're going to call it gender name. And then we're going to return a function that does the actual work. A filter always takes the object and then some additional inputs. You can add inputs as we did before by putting a colon and then more inputs. So we just need the object, which is the animal object, and then we use that to return an output. There's the input and there's the output, and that's just going to do a quick thing. Now, the thing to know about filters is they need to be fast. Make your filters fast. Don't put lots of stuff in them. Whatever they do, they have to do it fast, because every time there's a digest cycle, it's going to be run. It could be run hundreds of times in every digest cycle. And every time that anything changes on the page, a digest cycle happens. So make them fast. They are really cool, though. Now I think we're done. And I'm over time. But, all right. So, let's talk a little bit about some additional things. Our client just contacted me, and they want to track some other stuff too. They want to know about equipment on their ranch and tasks. So we're not going to write all of this, but so we're going to need two more modules, one that does equipment and one that does tasks. So it's a good thing that we made this thing extensible from the start. Let's see if I can quickly go through this. So there we have a partial that we will make for our menu at the top of the page, and then we will include that partials menu in our index.html. We add two more modules, the equipment module and the task module. Okay. So now we need to know how to get around. If you notice on the partials, it does it by doing an href with a reference in the page, right? Okay, so it has to know how to get around and when to use the modules. So let's change our app.js, and we need to inject those new modules into our application because we've added two more modules. So we're going to add ranch.equipment and ranch.task. And then we also need to add a new module that's provided by Angular called ng-root. And that gives us a root provider. And we can tell it about our roots that we have. So we're going to tell it that we're going to configure it on our ranch module. And we're going to tell it, use the root provider, and when you get /animals, then use the animal list.html control template and the animal controller. Same thing for equipment. We're going to use the equipment list.html and the equipment controller. And for tasks, we're going to use the task list and the task controller. Otherwise, we're going to redirect to /animals. In case they said put something weird there, we're just going to tell them we're going to go straight to the animals. So first of all, let's mock up our equipment list and task list. These are just mocks. We'll leave it to the interested party to finish this out because it can all be done pretty much the same way we've already been doing it. So there's our mocks for that, and then a very simple equipment controller and task controller. Okay. Now, we already have our animal list, so let's take that out of our index.html and put it into this template animal list. You also might notice that I removed the controller from there. Before we had a div class equals row, ng controller equals animal control. I removed that because now the root provider already knows what controller to use for this section of the DOM. So we're going to add to our index.html. We're going to include the partials and the header, for the header and the menu. But now we don't have anything that shows the animals. That's all gone. And we certainly don't have anything that shows the tasks and the equipment. So there's another directive called ngview. And ngview works together with ngroot and says, this is where whatever was in the root, this is where I want you to put it. Put it in ngview. So now we have 3 lines in the body of our web page. Very simple. So what do? We took a simple HTML page and we made it dynamic by adding Angular. We had scope variables that we used for the ranch name. We used an input with ngModel to be able to change things change our scope variables. We included our templates with ng-include, created a directive or a new HTML element. We loaded data from the server with ng-resource. We used an ng-repeat to loop through that array that we got from our server and display it. We searched by applying a filter to ng-repeat. We created a custom filter for our gender names, and we extended our application with new modules. That was a lot, and we successfully built an application from start to finish with only a few lines of actual JavaScript code. I didn't count them, but I think it's around 20 at most. And so that's it. There's some resources to help you get started with Angular. The Angular website is really great. It is incredibly well documented. Documentation is also one of Mishko's things. He's really into testing and really into documentation. So everything has to be documented. If you submit to the Angular core like I did, you got to get past both the testing and the documentation. The Code School has a great course called Shaping Up with AngularJS. It is free, so it's a great place to start. There's also lots of other tutorials. There's a Yeoman Angular generator to help you start up an application. It does not quite follow all the Angular best practices at the moment. The Angular best practices only recently came out. So I expect that will change and it will follow those best practices soon. And Angular UI, which is an incredible library of, it's actually a group of libraries now that help you do a lot of great things in Angular. So check that out. So, any questions? Yes?
I was noticing the code samples, you've got both double quotes and single quotes around the templates. Is that an intentional thing?
Around the templates, let's see here.
Sorry.
That's okay.
On the last couple, yeah.
Right. Not there.
Oh, may have been in the include.
I think what you're thinking of is,
Yeah, that partial on the right there, ng include, then you've got double quote, single quote.
yes, actually this right here. Okay, so the question was why do we have double quotes and single quotes in some of these places? Okay, so the double quotes is for HTML. This is an expression. So it evaluates this expression. And so since I'm putting a string there, I have to make it into an expression. So I put quotes around it so it's an expression. It could also be a variable. You could use whatever variable you want that can then be changed by Angular or in your module, in your controller. You could be changing this. If you used a variable, you could then change it, and it would show different things at different times. Okay. Yes?
I have a question about PHP theming and AngularJS. There are some kind of how-tos to get into the ability of creating multiple templates or themes with Cake and Angular.
I am not a Cake developer, so I'm afraid I'm not going to be very helpful on answering that question. Typically, you would probably separate your application into a API and then a front end.
Yes, because we define a different HTML tags on one spreadsheet, right? And normally you do that over the router of Cake. So this is a bit confusing for me. I have a question mark. How would I solve this?
The Angular router and your Cake router are going to be separate. They don't have anything to do with each other. Okay, so you can frequently what you'd want to do if you're building a totally Angular application is separate this. You have your API, which is driven by Cake or whatever framework you want to use, and then you would have a separate front end. That allows you to change your front end very easily when it's driven totally by an API. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Please rate my talk on Joined In.